Welcome to Neon Cobra. Let's kick into it. So, this week I'm actually going to revisit an old topic. We specifically talked about Azure Arc, and we kind of talked about some of its advantages for extending security updates. And what's prompting this is I saw an article on Reddit actually in the last week where someone was looking for support on how to buy ESUs for 2012 R2, and the general response was you needed software assurance and you needed to be an enterprise agreement, otherwise you weren't getting it, and or move it to Azure. And that was the end of the conversation. And that's not true, right? There is a mechanism in play for CSP, and that's via Azure Arc to on-premise. But there are some licensing considerations. So we're going to talk about this today. I'm going to break it down into the three areas. One is specifically going to be about the licensing requirements. And two is going to be about the ESU requirements and how those bills out. And three is the Azure Arc and how to deploy that. And in number three, we're going to walk through actually how to do that on a test system I have in play here. So taking up number one, the requirements. So one of the steps or the items required for this is active software assurance or equivalent subscription licensing. So a lot of people will see that first aspect and be like, I don't have open value. I don't have access to that licensing program. I can't do it. The second half is the subscription licensing, which is actively available to all really CSP partners. What you will find is this is the very same licensing that is used for Azure Hybrid Benefits. So while it was initially intended to be used for that, you're able to license on-prem ESU in a vCore physical model using this licensing. Now, unlike Azure Hybrid Benefits, you have to match data center to data center and standard to standard. So you'll need to look at the appropriate licensing. The 8 core minimums are still in play for virtual machines, and the 16 core minimums are still in play for on-premise. So when we're looking to price this out, just check if it's one virtual machine and it's 6 cores, you buy an 8 core pack. If it's 10 cores, you buy 2 8 core packs. You can't split the cores between virtual machines. Same as it were licensing hybrid benefits in Azure. So we take the licensing, you buy that. In Canadian, 1 year is $355, 3 years $906. My general recommendation is do it 1 year at a time because that gives you runway and not necessarily sunk costs into an old system if you want to retire it out. 2, you need to do ESU licensing. Now, ESU licensing is treated like a resource or an item in Azure. You provision it and activate it, and it bills through an Azure subscription like any other Azure-based service. Now, the interesting thing on this one is it retros back to the day the ESU is available when you buy it. So as of today, October 29th, if I were to buy 2024, if I were to buy this ESU, I would have to pay for 12 months of ESUs back to the 2023 release date. And this is just so people don't kick the can down the road until there's like a 7.9 that is released, and then they buy it and they're all good, right? The idea is you're supposed to be maintaining these updates as time goes on. So for Canadian pricing, 8 vCore ESU licenses are $51 for standard and $294 per month for data center. So for this exercise, we're going to talk about the standard licensing. So today, let's say I'd buy it. On my next invoice on November 5th, I would see a charge for $51 times 12. So without having to do too much math off the top of my head, it'd be about 600 and change on our first invoice. That doesn't include the 8 vCore licenses that I had to buy on a 1 or 3 years. So you're probably away for maybe just around $1,000 today. But for every month you kick it down the road, you will see that this continues to increase in costs. So for partners looking to maybe get clients onto the system, these costs aren't very expensive. You may want to add maybe some management around this as well, because what you're going to find is certain tools are not going to work in these environments anymore. Case in point, and we'll talk about this during my deployment, I was attempting to get Chrome or Firefox installed in this 2012 R2 just for easier validation and activation into Azure, due to on and off and such, and it wouldn't let me install. Right? The systems are so old, the latest versions of Chrome and Firefox, really any Chromium browser doesn't even work on this anymore. So you're starting to see tools be removed, and maybe these are tools you're relying upon. So this is something to protect your business and to protect your clients, to get in front of, to ensure you're at least providing some baseline security, but really having that planning conversation to shut these environments down. So what we're going to do is I'm going to screen share on a different system. I'm having to do a 1, 2, 3 hop. I'm running a virtual machine behind me, and I'm going to hop into it using a remote software here. And this is what we're going to share out, and we'll walk through. Now, some of these items are delayed. So you're going to find as we're going through, I might screen cut because it could take 2 to 3 minutes for things to come up. And then there is a provisioning time required for ESU validity. So I'm going to hop to an already existing system. But start to finish, you will finish this and understand how to roll this out and be able to kind of package this moving forward. Wonderful. So we have our screen shared out. And what you're going to see right now is the Azure Arc page. So the way you would get to this, right? First, you'd provision Azure subscription through your preferred provider. And then once you have that up and online, you can then come in and search for Azure Arc at the top here. Once you've searched for Azure Arc, you're then going to choose under Overview, Add Resources. So specifically, we're going to focus on adding an individual virtual machine. Hopefully you're not running entire clusters of 2012 R2 and you'll be approaching items from a virtual machine level. So we will come in and we'll choose add or create a virtual machine. So what this is going to do is provide us some different options on how to connect in the server to Azure Arc. Now, the Azure Arc feature itself is free, assuming you don't turn on any additional services. So that's something you just want to be aware of. If you start playing around with maybe some of the additional automations and orchestrations, you may find some charges kind of climb up on there, especially if you start doing SQL extended security updates as well. That monthly rate tends to be a little bit more expensive. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end as well. But high level, SQL Server 2012 and 2014 also receive their extended security updates through this mechanism. Now, their licensing is a little bit more at $355 and $374 respectively for 2012 and 2014. And then you still have to pay for the resources as well, especially if you move them into Azure. So you need to really be careful when you activate these features. Anyways, focusing on the Azure virtual machine. You have the option to do script. You have the option to do server installer for kind of your easiest way to go about this. Now, I ran this a little bit earlier for testing purposes, and funny enough, the script I have problems with in 2012 R2 because I don't have an active browser that supports modern logins. Part of the script then tries to kick off authentication or a login for Office 365, or rather for the Microsoft Identity Services, and it won't even load the page. So I found during my installer, I actually have to download the installer instead. So you download this and you move it to your machine. And that's what you'll be seeing here is this Arc setup. This is the onboarding script as well that I attempted earlier, but you simply bring it in, you run them as administrator, and it will connect into your pre-existing Arc services. If you do the Arc setup, you're going to install the Arc Connected Agent. Now, this is a generalized MSI, so you'll have to provide some information, whereas the other system, the onboarding script, has the subscriptions and resource groups predefined in here. So we'll let this run, and we'll likely edit ahead as we go through, specifically around some credentials and such. So we'll start with the general sign-in here, and it's a fairly straightforward. Now this is, unless you're doing the multiple services of the script, this is likely not an automated, this is a manual intervention. So we'll let this run here. So once you've got this launched, we'll choose next. You'll choose where we're going to sign on. Now you have this option to actually do it via device logon, which I actually prefer doing. The fun part about this is as long as you have an authenticated browser, it will take, very similar to like if you're onboarding a Roku or a Chrome device where you can do it from your cell phone. So we're actually going to generate a code, and I'm going to copy that code. I'm going to come over to my other side here, and we're going to go microsoft.com/device logins. And because I'm already logged into the correct tenant, I'm going to accept the code, choose the account I'm authenticating with, and then connect in. And once it has successfully connected, you come back to the MSI and choose next. We'll choose your tenant. We'll choose your subscription. Use the demo sub. We'll choose the My Arc test, and you'll choose your region. And this is going to connect this server into Azure Arc. So what we're going to see, this can take about 2 minutes. So we'll pause here. Oh, perfect. Nice and quick. And then we're going to flip back over to Azure. So as I come back to my Microsoft Azure and I choose Azure Arc and choose all Azure Arc resources, you're going to find the system itself has now been added. This is the previous test one that I have in play, and this is the new one that I've had added. So we'll click into the resource itself. You can see information about the eval version, the computer name and such, and the current status, whether it's connected or not. So that'll tell you things are online. On the left under operations, you're going to have updates. Updates are going to be exactly what you think they are. What Windows updates you have available to you. So when you first connect in here, you're not actually going to see anything, right? It has to run a general assessments. And the way it does this is it plugs into your WSUS service local to the system, and it runs an update to see what might be available. Now, I went ahead earlier and fully updated it as far as I could, all the patches and everything on this window. So this is not going to pull anything. But one of the things you'll probably want to do is enable periodic assessments. Periodic assessments are going to scan to check to see what is made available to this. And if there's abilities to do hot patching and such, it will allow you to do that, but it can't for Windows 2012. That's for more modern operating systems. So once the hot patch settings are established, you can run a check for updates, and it'll trigger an assessment. What this will do is it'll learn more about the system, and will eventually determine whether it has any pending updates, and if not, whether it's applicable for extended security updates. So with that in mind, instead of waiting, it could take a few hours from what I've seen for it to show up. We're actually to go back to the other resource I have here. Now, although this resource is dead and disconnected, the windows that we want to be looking at still exist here. Now, you notice this page will be very similar, but there's this extra extended security update option, and specifically the Enable Now. When you choose Enable Now, it is going to start enrolling this system into extended security updates. And this will lead us to our third section, creating the extended security license. You can do it on your own, or you can do it from this guided walkthrough as well. So we're going to do it through the guided walkthrough. First, we need to understand whether it's virtual or physical. This will determine the type of ESU licenses it has made available to it. And that will determine what shows up in this drop-down list. If it can't find any, you're going to choose Create an ESU License. So we're going to go through, do our standard items, essentially where do we want to store these ESUs. Choose the subscription, choose the resource group. Test Neon ESU will be the license name. And then we get to decide whether to activate now or activate later. So as you can see, it's saying it starts the billing cycle today. So when we approached this, say 13 months ago in September, a lot of partners may have been doing an activate later, preparing for the ESUs to become active and then turn the license on. Now, in that previous window where you get to choose the ESU, it will not appear there until you activate. And I'll show you how to get to them after if you have pre-established licensing you want to activate. Now, because I'm not actually going to be backing this system up, and I quite honestly don't want to be back charged 12 months for an ESU, I'm going to choose activate later, but the rest of the guided walkthrough will still make sense. If you're looking to activate immediately, just choose activate now and you'll receive your retro invoice on the next bill. We'll choose our region. I like to keep the region the same as where my virtual machine is deployed. Doesn't really matter in this case because we're not exactly applying these systems, applying these updates to an Azure resource. But because I'm a Canadian, I always do Canada Central. Then we choose down the SKU, right? You have to determine whether you're doing standard or the data center. If you've got a mix and match, you need to create a second licensing file, essentially, to protect these items. So we'll choose the standard edition. Then we choose physical or virtual. Again, this matters because if I choose physical, it's expecting 16 cores. And that goes back to the $102 a month price for the ESUs. If I choose virtual cores, I am able to do 8 at 51. So let's run a scenario here. What I'm looking at right now is one virtual machine, but let's say I had 4 virtual machines and the total accumulated value, or total accumulated core count was 24. I can start with 24 cores. And then let's say I shut one of the systems down. I can come back in and lower my licensing count to 20, lowering my monthly costs. And as you start to shut the environment down, you have the ability to lower your ongoing ESU costs. So whereas the subscription licensing is a 1 year or 3 year fixed, there's no early term cancellation, this can actually flex as you move things forward. So it gives you a little bit of fire ammunition for cost savings to your clients if you're trying to figure out how to, lower ongoing costs. It's like, look, you've got these systems, they're costing more and more every month to keep online. And this is where you can maybe apply a little pressure, maybe increase your services to manage these, because not only is there licensing increases, but your tools start to have problems, right? So you can start to apply a little bit of pressure to maybe coax and really advise your client into modern operating systems. Next, volume licensing, not applicable to this plan. That's if you have traditional software assurance, maybe you've got long terms, things like that you need to prove. In this case, the assumption is you don't have software assurance, you're not transacting in volume licensing, you're dealing in your traditional Azure Arc and CSP model. And then this is the back billing warning, right? Essentially, October 10th, 2023, new and revised are subject to back billing. So if you turn this on, it retros back. It will give you your US-based rates. So for any of my US partners, I will be attaching a licensing page from Microsoft, so you can choose your local currency. I've been referencing Canadian, but these are your US rates. So anyone international viewers, this may not reflect your actual cost. Be sure to check the pricing sheet for your local currency. And this will be affected by exchange rate fluctuations, so account for that. You will then attest that you have the correct software assurance or server license subscriptions, which is the CSP we talked about. Just double check that it's activate later, and we'll choose create. This will then create the ESU license. And at that point, if it was active, you can go back through and you can choose the license type here. Because I didn't activate it, it doesn't show as an active license. If you ever want to come in and see what licenses you have available, back under Azure Arc, under licenses, you can click to see any of the test ESUs you have in play here and determine whether you want to manage them or not. You can even come through, and if you have licenses, you can apply them from this side as well, but because we don't have any licenses active, we can't really see them. So I'll do a quick check just to see whether this is updated yet or whether it is showing ESU available, and no, it'll take a little while for that to show up. So that is long and short how you would activate Azure Arc. You would plug in the extended security updates and start providing ongoing protection to your clients. You really don't want to sleep on this, right? When we get down to it in the end, it may be easy just to back up and say, you know what, we'll just get them on the next upgrade. Let's not worry about it. But this is really easy to do. And if you have a lot, you can start onboarding at scale. And it provides you a little bit of ammunition or pressure to have these security-based conversations with your clients, talk about their evolution or their modernization path. It's really great for kind of ongoing customer growth as well. You may be able to pick up some new customers that might have been left high and dry by previous providers that didn't know about this trick, and they're trying to hedge their bets for security reasons by letting those partners go and fire them. Again, this is a stopgap. You need to ensure that you are planning for decommissions. This is not a Hail Mary. Don't worry, they'll run this indefinitely. From experience, you might maybe say 3 years on this, but at any one point, Microsoft could say, look, we're not doing year 2. You've had 13 years, 14 years to shut these systems down and modernize. We're well beyond that support cycle. Modern software support is starting to shut down on this stuff as well. We can't help you out. So, try to take it into your own hands. Make sure you are well provided and well supported on this. It's also worth learning and familiarizing yourself with this, because like we saw with SQL 2012 and SQL 2014 and soon SQL 2017 and likely Windows Server 2016, this is likely to be the delivery method moving forward for ESUs to CSP partners and non-enterprise agreements. So the way of getting a Mac key, plugging it in, and getting ESUs don't really work anymore. You need to learn this new system, because my belief is that this is how we're going to deliver them moving forward. So if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out. Looking for some collaboration, please share this out. We really need to increase security postures. And I really don't want to see articles like this on Reddit anymore of like, you can't do it, just modernize them, because generally the outcome of that is they just let it slide. I don't want to see this happen. So again, thanks for joining. Catch you next time.